I don't know if you've been following my videos or not, but if you are, well, I think it's pretty obvious I haven't uploaded in forever. There are two simple reasons for that. Firstly, my creative juices ran out. It's pretty hard to consistently milk ideas out of one story, and I know I can cover series besides Death Note, but I don't really have any ideas that haven't been covered by others for those series either. My second reason, however, is suggested by the title. I do not like Death Note anymore. Now, this was something I realized only after watching other series with characters I genuinely care about, but I noticed I never really cared for the characters of Death Note the same way I do for those other series' characters. The other reason I don't like the series anymore is simply because it's not smart. If anything, it's quite dumb actually. Other series might have mistakes similar to the ones I'm pointing out, but it's particularly bad in Death Note because of how it moves the plot forward with strategy and is convinced it's really smart. I'm glad to show you many examples of the series' stupidity, but just a minor heads up, this video was inspired by me adding a lot to the 188 show page for Death Note on TV Tropes because yeah, quarantine's a bitch. So don't be surprised if some points here echo points from that page. You can just check the edit history to see which points are added after all. The first strategy Light uses is revealing to L that he has ties to the police, in order to have L investigate the police, and hopefully in retaliation, the police will investigate L and they'll find out his name and face for Light. This strategy is not smart. The only lead L has is that Kira is in the Kanto region of Japan, so there are millions of suspects, and with this act, Light narrows it down to a few hundred. Is it worth it though? Definitely not. What if the police resign instead of investigating L? This is literally what happened in the series. What if the police figure it out too? This will result in the police splitting into several groups and investigating each other instead of L. Or most importantly, even if an investigation on L happens, what if they don't find out anything about L? If the ICPO cannot figure out who L is after all this time, how does Light expect the Japanese police, who literally never even noticed Light's first victim, to find out who L is? Now okay, you could defend this by saying it's perfectly in character because he's egotistical or whatever, but he clearly doesn't underestimate L, and his mistake was simply not reading the police moves correctly. After Ryuk tells Light about him having a tail, which is an issue on its own because of how arbitrarily Ryuk helps Light, Light learns his tail's name by staging a butt-jacking and pressuring his tail into giving Light his ID. I find this plan to be clever, but my issue with it is that Light doesn't account for the fact that Ray could easily report this to his superiors as an incident where he was forced to show a suspect his ID. Imagine what happens if, when all the FBI agents die, L knows that the only one who could learn one of their names was Light Yagami because he received Ray's ID. Light would become a prime suspect immediately. To prevent this, Light could have just started controlling Ray when the bus jacking was over to make him never report this incident. This one's a really minor point and only applies to the manga, but Light did something quite dumb in his plan to have Ray kill all the FBI agents. That is, he had Ray call another agent so that that agent could ask his boss for the file containing all the agents' names and faces. The thing about this is that Light had already accounted for phone records being a risk, which is why he had Ray communicate to him using a walkie-talkie. So then why did Light have Ray call this agent using a phone? He knows L could access his info and it would immediately pinpoint Ray as the agent Kira used. In fact, I'm surprised L didn't immediately begin investigating Ray because of this. And that's why I prefer the anime's approach to this, which was having Ray control his boss into sending the file. After L installs cameras, Light clears his name by killing when he had no way of obtaining that info. Despite this, L suspects Light for no reason at all. Literally the only justification L gave was that Light was too perfect. Seriously? Okay, one could argue Light taunted L or whatever, but that's debatable because I doubt L would call Light too perfect if he literally taunted L, and even then, that's simply not a solid reason. I just find L suspecting Light pretty contrived. At this point in the story, L is certain Light's Kira and just needs to prove it. So what's his plan? Wait months for them to be able to enter university, then get closer to Light, then have him help with the investigation, just kind of hoping he makes a mistake sometime. It's odd because L has the resources to find proof very easily, and that's by confining Light and then observing the halting criminals dying, the same way L did right before the Yotsuba arc. Except this time he can make the situation more humane by putting Light in a nice spacious room, but it'd still be unconstitutional, meaning the task force might oppose this. Except Soichiro is fine with planted cameras on the off chance it might get a lead, simply in order to clear his family's name. In other words, L can get Soichiro to be on board with this idea by saying that it could clear Light's name. Now Light did set killings from before, so criminals would still be dying during his confinement, but L and the task force would keep him in there because they'd be suspicious of how no one knew he was dying, and then eventually they'd keep him in there long enough for 23 days to pass and the killing simply stopped. L's reasoning for there being a second Kira was pretty weak. One of his reasons was that that Kida usually only kills hardcore criminals, but it's kind of a huge assumption to say that there is literally a whole new Kida simply because of a slight change in MO, something which could be explained away as Kida wanted to seem even more threatening to get L to appear on TV. His other reason was that this Kida kills with the face when the original Kida needed a name as well, except that could just be explained as Kida's powers changing. Izor brings this up, but L says that if that were the case, Kida would be killing criminals whose names are not broadcasted. Except for all L knows, Kida could have gained these abilities very recently, so it hasn't been long enough for L to say that. And even then, Kida could just be trying to be inconspicuous about it to mislead them. L's final reason was that the second Kida is stupid with tech, but come on. L has no good reason to believe Kida's intelligent, especially since Kida was a guy who fell for L trap and revealed he's linked to the police. And even if Kida was a good strategist, that doesn't mean he's good with tech. L sets up a test to show the second Kida's tapes and see if he concludes that there is a second Kida. If he doesn't, then suspicion against him will increase. But why? Even assuming L had a reasonable basis for the second Kida theory, how is it suspicious for Light to not figure it out just because he's smart? People's abilities are not consistent, and this is also assuming Light knows that figuring out there's a second Kida means that there's a way to stop her. Light's response to this test is stupid too. He decides to show L that he figured out there's a second Kida when he really shouldn't have. The worst that can happen if he doesn't is that he seems slightly more suspicious maybe. But if he keeps quiet, not only is L's theory less credible to the task force, but on the off chance L didn't actually figure it out, Light could just let things run their course and the second Kida can easily kill L. When L figures out that the two Kidas have made contact, L says that this makes it less likely for Light to be Kida, since if Light was Kida, he'd be smart enough to have the second Kida say that she doubts a message actually came from Kida and change her mind, so she'll continue with her previous threat of wanting L to appear on TV. Makes you wonder why Light didn't simply do that, but Light's ego is hurt and explains why L is wrong, saying that it wouldn't be smart for him to do that since he knows L will find a way out of the threat. But it would be smart because L might actually appear on TV and there's nothing to lose even if L doesn't show up. To add to that, L reveals that it was just a test, which means that he saw Light's reasoning as valid too. L knows Misa very well might be the second Kida shortly after he found the physical evidence against her. He's been in hiding for a while because he knows the second Kida can kill with her face. He also knows that Light and Misa have made contact, so he wants to discourage Light from killing him and tells Light that if he dies, the task force and other L's will begin to suspect Light. Does he send someone else to say that? Nope, he literally goes himself to meet Light in person, knowing full well that Misa can kill with her face and that she'll probably be hanging out with Light. Misa does end up meeting L and seeing his name, but L is lucky enough for her to forget his name. At this point, Misa sees L's name, but she can't tell Light because of a crowd forming around her. He knows that L might try something and he knows that there's a risk of L detaining her, so why does Light wait around and stay quiet, just be polite? He could literally just pull her to the side and have her whisper into his ear what L's name is. Sure, it might be rude or suspicious, but come on, he's literally learning L's name. When he kills L, that won't matter anymore. L was quite brutally torturing Misa, and even though they have physical evidence against her, it's messed up and I'm pretty sure it's not allowed, which is why I'm surprised the task force just let it slide. When Light was confined, the killings resumed after 15 days. The task force pressured L to release Light and Misa because of this. And I get Light, but why Misa? It's not like the second Kida is doing continuous killings anyway. The task force discovers a death note and they find the 13-day rule, which leads them to conclude that Light and Misa are 100% innocent and that L should not suspect them ever again. And my god, are they stupid for this. There's literal physical evidence against Misa and they disregard all that simply because of this rule? They know that there are dozens of other unwritten rules, so for all they know, there could be some loophole which lets Misa or Light get around the 13-day rule. Or maybe their Shinigami wrote for them the whole time, which would explain why they didn't die. It's just absurd they'll find the 13-day rule is even more concrete than the physical evidence suggesting Misa is the second Kida. And while they don't have evidence against Light, he still should have been suspected because of the second Kida making a tape implying she met Kida in Aoyama, Misa herself admitting to having first met Light in Aoyama, the killing stopping for 2 weeks during Light's confinement, and there being a new Kida right after this hiatus. To add to that, Light's whole plan spanning the Yotsuba arc is easily one of the dumbest aspects of the series. Just to recap, the situation is that the task force can find Misa, and while they don't have any evidence on Light, they still suspect him and Misa might confess any second, so Rem wipes Misa's memory to prevent that from happening. However, she threatens to kill Light if Misa stays confined, so he has to do something. In other words, Light could very simply have Rem kill L. The task force might suspect Light, but it's such a minor threat since they don't have evidence on him, and it's definitely definitely worth getting rid of his main enemy and preventing Rem from killing him. Now there is the issue of Light needing to free Misa, so what he could have done is have Rem write a letter and send that to the task force. The letter says that it's written by Kira and that he's been controlling Misa the whole time before making her lose her memory. Furthermore, Misa telepathically sent L's face to him so he could very easily kill L at any time. The letter will then instruct them to release Misa or else he will kill L, the task force, and a bunch of innocent people. It's almost certain they'll release Misa because of A, the letter claiming Misa was merely controlled, which was a possibility the task force have considered before, B, Misa having evidently lost her memory, C, Kira threatening to kill them and a bunch of innocent people, and D, Rem controlling L to having complied with the instructions in the letter. After this happens, Rem can have L commit suicide because he admitted defeat or whatever. Now what exactly is my problem with the plan Light used in the series? Well, as mentioned before, the task force are simply idiots for believing the 13-day rule is something which actually clears Light's and Misa's names, meaning Light's whole end goal was banking on the task force being such idiots. If they were reasonable, they'd confine Misa again and suspect Light again, so the situation would be the exact same as before, except this time they know of the death note and even have a copy. This isn't my only problem with the plan, it's risky as hell. Why? Because Light decided to wipe his memory for no good reason whatsoever. He said it was to prevent him from confessing, but that's a problem Light with his memories could manage anyway. All this did was make him lose control of the situation, make it absolutely necessary for Higuchi to not die, and make it crucial for Light to be in such a situation where he actually knows Higuchi's name, can kill him without anyone noticing, and has an excuse to keep hold of the notebook as it happens. Otherwise, well, he's screwed. This whole plan relied on so much luck to work, and even if it does, it shouldn't have even been helpful to him. On the topic of Rem wanting Light to free Misa, why didn't she just kill the whole task force? I get why Light didn't have Rem do that because he doesn't want to kill his dad, but Rem acting on her own easily could have just done that to free Misa instead of threatening Light to come up with something. Now we've reached the second part, so from here on out I'll only be covering the manga simply because the anime's second part is riddled with far too many problems, ranging from major pacing issues to outright plot holes. Now the Mafia arc, the arc where Near, Light, and the task force are battling Mello, is actually my favorite arc of the series and one I genuinely like, but it's still filled with problems. For example, how Light didn't use Jack Snyder to send a picture of Mello. If Light's gonna specify in his conditions that Snyder will be as discreet as possible sending Misa his address, then he might as well also just have Snyder send a picture. Even if Snyder fails to do so, Light will have nothing to lose. After Sido thwarts Light's first attempt to raid Mello, Hideo tells Light about Sido's motives, which are to regain the Death Note. Light suggests giving Sido his Death Note and telling him to kill Mello with it, so now both Light and Sido get what they want. This idea is discarded because of how Sido could very well just take the Death Note and immediately return to the Shinigami realm, but what's stopping Light from having Ryu give Sido a tiny piece of the notebook and telling him to kill the entirety of Mello's mob with it, which would allow Sido to take their Death Note? There's absolutely nothing preventing this. Why didn't the task force kill Mello? I get why Soichiro didn't do it. It's been established Soichiro sees using the Death Note as inherently evil, not to mention the fact that it's probably better to negotiate since writing in the Death Note is slower than Mello's switch, meaning Mello could simply blow everything up the moment he thinks he's gonna die anyway. Except there's no reason whatsoever for the task force not to kill Mello using their guns. There's nothing establishing they wouldn't, especially since they just killed Jose with it, and Mello is a very dangerous and immediate threat. On that topic, the task force shouldn't have even been able to shoot Mello in the first place. Mello ordered them to throw all their weapons away, and I know they ended up using their handguns to kill Jose, but why didn't Mello just order them to throw away their handguns too? It seems absurd to me that he didn't see their holsters or account for them using handguns. I know this is 100% just my personal taste, but I don't like how Mello started to take a backseat. I love conflicts between three people in fiction, so I feel there's a lot of opportunity wasted by simply having Nier and Mello cooperate from here on out, even if only jointly. Imagine how interesting it would be if Nier threatens Mello into doing something for him by saying he'll show his picture to the task force. This could lead to Mello maybe allying with the task force or Akira in some way to try to get at Nier, while Mello secretly sabotaging them somehow. I just feel there's certain routes the story could have gone which would have been super interesting, so it's disappointing how they made such a fun character sit back, because Oba doesn't know how to handle a character who knows too much. It's pretty dumb that Light, as Kira, never threatened the task force into returning his notebook. Not only did him not doing that result in Nier suspecting Kira as being part of the task force, but it's also better for Light to make sure they don't hold a notebook simply to keep its location a secret. Nier starts to turn the task force against the Light, so why didn't he just kill the whole task force. Yeah, I get it, he can't fake his death or else it'll be running away, but he doesn't have to. He can openly admit to being the only survivor and claim that the Shinigami wants to keep L alive in order to do Kira's bidding using L's resources, and that he suspects that's the true reason why Kira gave the Shinigami and Death Note to the task force. Or maybe he could say that Kira, who has access to NPA's info, wanted to kill anyone who worked on the case years ago, which is why he couldn't get info on Light, since his joining the investigation is confidential. Of course, it would be super suspicious, but it wouldn't be proof and it'd definitely be worth it. It's been established that Light has so many resources, both as Kira and as L, so it's just baffling how after he learns SPK's location, Light decides to send a bunch of disorganized, greedy civilians to attack the SPK, instead of, you know, taking advantage of the fact that the US now lent Kira the support and sending a proper elite task force with weapons and cameras to raid the SPK and kill them. Had he done that, he literally would have won right then and there. Why doesn't Light have Mikami keep a page of the notebook? I know that Mikami couldn't have used it in the final confrontation, assuming Nier controlled Mikami with the Death Note, but it's not like Light knew that Nier would eventually be able to do that, so it's still an issue with Light's planning. Not to mention, it'd still be convenient for Mikami to have a page in case of emergencies, something which would have solved the whole Takeda issue later on. One could say it's risky for Mikami to keep a page because for all they know, Nier could have tons of cameras within Mikami's home, which might make Nier confiscate the page, but it's not necessarily suspicious to just have a tiny piece of torn paper lying around, especially if Mikami just puts in a normal notebook or something. Nier's whole plan to swap out the notebook was inherently flawed because Mikami writing in everyone's name except Light's is not concrete proof Light is Kira. Since Mikami knew of the meeting and did arrive at the warehouse, it is proof that Kira is among the SPK or task force, except it's not any clearer than when Light launched a raid on the SPK the exact moment the task force learned their location, so that's already established before. But Mikami writing everyone's name except Light's could just be explained away as a task force member being Kira and taking advantage of Nier suspecting Light, or simply Nier being Kira and framing Light. I know that there are other suspicious things about Light and this is just a clincher, except then it means that this plan doesn't change the situation at all, since the raid on SPK already made it obvious is one of these people, and there were suspicious things about Light even then. Light's response to Nier's plan was also stupid itself. His plan was to have Mikami carry around a fake notebook so that Nier fails to swap the real one, which would allow Mikami to actually use the real one during their meeting. Except this plan is dumb because if Nier has even the slightest bit of suspicion that the Death Note Mikami has is fake, which should be justifiable considering Mikami's usage of it in public, then Light's whole plan falls apart. Not only that, but thanks to Light intentionally confirming to Nier that Mikami's ex-Kira, Nier could go searching for the real notebook. He might first think to search for places where Mikami can lock it up safely, which would result in him eventually finding the bank and seizing the Death Note for himself. Speaking of which, it's so stupid how Light wastes his time doing this whole fake notebook gambit when he could yet again simply kill Nier using a raid. One could argue he can't do that because that would notify the task force, but Light could just have Mikami acting as Kira and make the arrangements. One could also argue that the moment Nier thinks he's gonna die, he'll shoot Light because he knows he can't get proof on Light anyway, so he might as well just kill him. So to solve that issue, Light could just not go to the meeting and control the task force to force him to go so that they don't stop him or anything. On top of that, it's stupid how Nier doesn't consider the possibility of this happening. Why doesn't Light consider the possibility of Nier just shooting him at the meeting? Yeah, sure, Nier wants to get proof on Light before killing him, but Light doesn't know that for sure, so he's banking his life on what kind of person he thinks Nier is. Even if Light's plan does succeed and Mikami managed to get the real notebook for the meeting, what if Mikami just kills Light right then and there? We know Mikami's way too loyal to do that, but Light doesn't know that for sure. For all he knows, Mikami has been waiting for an opportunity to kill Light the whole time, so he's banking his life on what kind of person he thinks Mikami is. Mello kidnapping Takeda is such a disrespect to his character. We have no idea what the hell Mello is even attempting to begin with. We don't know if you're trying to learn Mikami's identity then go after Mikami himself. We don't know if you're trying to bait Mikami into killing Takeda in order to expose the real notebook to Nier. And we don't know if he wanted to sacrifice himself for whatever reason. His intentions and motives are completely left in the dark. So not only does this come off as some contrived way to just have Mello do something and express a theme of Nier and Mello completing L together, but also makes the conclusion of his whole character arc unclear. Finally, a moment that understandably gets a lot of hate, Mikami going to the bank. This move resulted in Nier seizing the real notebook for himself and allowed him to win this whole battle. It's frustrating because it wasn't even Light's mistake, it was completely someone else's. I used to defend this moment by arguing that Mikami absolutely had to kill Takeda and he had no idea Light had to snip it and was able to do the same, so Mikami was justified in disobeying Light's orders since the situation was an emergency Light hadn't accounted for before. Except like, What's the worst that can happen if Mikami lets Takada live? Nier finds Mello's corpse and suspects Takada has means of killing, which might make him suspect Mikami had a fake notebook all along, which would result in him cancelling the meeting. And worst case scenario, Nier eventually finds a real notebook. Now what happens if Mikami solves the issue by going to the bank? Knowing full well he's being followed, Nier literally finds a notebook right then and there. The worst case scenario with leaving Takada alive is the best case scenario with using the notebook. I also did argue that Mikami went to the notebook in order to discreetly tear out a page to use during the meeting, and that we don't see that because Nier used the notebook on Mikami, except it's still stupid because Mikami didn't account for Nier using the notebook on him. In fact, as far as he knows, Nier could completely violate his code and simply kill Light with a notebook. Even if we ignore just how much worse Mikami's solution was compared to the actual issue at hand, Mikami had perfect reason to believe Light had a snippet of the notebook, because of how Light was careful enough to have Takada keep a snippet herself, and also how Light threatened to kill Mikami when he first got the death note. Finally, even though it's best for Mikami to stay put, he still could have done something without going to the real notebook. That is, he could have had Takada ask Light whether he gives Mikami permission to move, using some codes like they had before this to prevent the task force from getting suspicious. Anyway, with all that said, that is why I simply do not like the series anymore. Now, while the vast majority of this is pointing at stupid moves on the character's part, which shows how the series gets in over its head about how smart it thinks it really is, I'm not necessarily claiming the series is bad. I'm not personally sure if it is, but regardless, maybe sometime in the future I'll like it ironically. But that's not really how it is at the moment. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and please be sure to comment your thoughts down below.